Fox is a fairly old creature type in Magic the Gathering, making its debut in 1995's Ice Age with Arctic Foxes. However, it would be quite some time before Foxes made another appearance. It was only in 2004's Champions of Kamigawa that the creature type returned, and it returned in a big way, with that Plains Fox people, the Kitsune, which are based on real-world Japanese folklore, prominently featured in the set, especially on white cards. Foxes have since appeared in many other sets, although Kamigawa is certainly still the plane that features them the most prominently. There are 51 cards in Magic that either have the Fox creature type or make a Fox creature token, and of them an impressive 1/3 of at least one top 8 at a major Magic event. In this video we'll look at the 10 Foxes that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic the Gathering. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I rank cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points, this includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like regional championships. At number 10, it's Inquisitive Glimmer, a fox that is legal in Standard right now. For a white and a blue, it's a 2/3 enchantment creature, and it makes enchantments you cast cost 1 generic less to cast, and it makes unlock costs you pay cost 1 generic less. This gives you a pretty legit body for the cost, and between the fact that it's an enchantment and it makes your enchantments better, it's pretty clear what type of deck you're supposed to play this in, and indeed, the Glimmer was played in Azorius Aura decks in Standard. These decks had lots of enchantment payoffs, like the Glimmer and Entity Tracker, as well as a bunch of auras, so the Glimmer was really great at helping you go off. However, Azorius Aura decks don't have any top 8s so far in 2025, so this Fox may not move any higher on the list, although it's hard to count it out entirely, because it's a pretty good card and it has a whole lot of time left in Standard. At number 9, it's Hotshot Mechanic, the first of many Kamigawa Foxes on the list. For 1 white mana, it's a 2/1 artifact creature, and it can crew vehicles as though its power were 2 or greater. So the baseline here is Savannah Lions, and it's also really great at crewing vehicles, and comes with a useful artifact type, making it a nice 1-drop in any white deck that's into artifacts more broadly, and vehicles in particular. Its points all came in Standard, where it was played in white weenie decks that generally ran a few vehicles. However, it doesn't have any top 8 since 2023. At number 8, it's Zirda the Dawnwaker. For 1 generic and 2 red-white hybrid mana, this legendary fox is a 3/3 that reduces the cost of your activated abilities by 2 generic, but it can't reduce the cost to less than 1 generic mana. You can also pay 1 generic mana to make a creature unable to block for a turn. It's also a companion, which means that if you meet a deck building requirement, you can pay 3 generic mana to put it into your hand from your sideboard. Originally, you could simply cast a companion from your sideboard, but the mechanic had to be powered down since that meant you effectively started every game with an 8-card hand, and it turned out that even companion requirements weren't difficult enough to offset that. Especially because the companion requirement usually works really well with the companion, making it one of the best cards in your deck. Zirda's requirement is that every permanent in your deck has to have an activated ability, and obviously if you meet this requirement, that means that Zirda's ability to reduce the cost of activated abilities will affect most of the non-land permanents in your deck. Not long after being printed, Zirda got banned in Legacy because it could easily create infinite mana alongside Grim or Basalt Monolith. Zirda reduces the cost of the Monolith's untap ability, so you end up actually netting 1 mana every time you tap it for mana and use the ability. Because Zirda is a companion, that meant you always started the game with it available to you, so it was basically a 1-card combo. In short, the combo was too consistent and easy to assemble even for a format as powerful as Legacy, and it got banned out of the format in May 2020. It actually got banned before Companion was powered down in June 2020, but even after the erratum, it has remained banned in Legacy as it still makes infinite mana far too accessible. Since its early days, getting banned out of Legacy, Zirda has also found some success in Pioneer. Back in 2023, it appeared as the Companion and Retraction Helix combo decks. This deck uses Rona, Herald of Invasion, Mox Amber, and the Helix. If you cast the Helix, that meant you could tap Rona to bounce the Amber to your hand after tapping the Amber for mana, then cast the Amber again, which untaps Rona. This creates a cycle that ultimately gives you infinite mana, which you can use to win the game. Zirda isn't crucial to this combo like it was in Legacy, but the deck also runs a bunch of Kamigawa channel lands, as well as Lazov to copy a Rona in the graveyard, and Zirda makes all of those cards better. That said, while Zirda was played a bit in this style of deck, most Rona Helix decks don't use it, and have moved towards using Gigantha as their companion instead, and Zirda doesn't have any top 8 since 2023. At number 7, it's Filigree Familiar. For 3 generic mana, it's a 2/2 that gains you 2 life when it enters and draws you a card when it dies. Basically, this cute little fox robot gives you some serious value for the cost, potentially generating a 2-for-1, and getting you out of danger by gaining you some life, and it's always been played in decks that are great at taking advantage of that value. For example, in Standard it was played in Emerge decks. Sacrificing the Familiar when you cast a discounted Elder Deep Fiend feels pretty darn good. For a time it was also played in modern Tron decks, which are focused on producing lots of colorless mana, but they often need time to do it. The Familiar was colorless and could help you find that time by blocking something, gaining you life, and helping you find more Tron lands. It's also legal in Pauper now, a format where only commons are legal, after a reprint at Common and Commander Legends, and it picked up its first top 8 in the format earlier this year, so it may move higher on the list in the future. At number 6, it's 8.5 Tails. For 2 white, it's a 2/2, and you can pay 1 generic and a white to have a permanent you control gain protection from white until end of turn. That ability might seem a little narrow, but you can also pay 1 generic to have a spell or permanent become white until end of turn. So if you've got 8.5 Tails in play and 2 generic and a white, it does a bad impression of Mother of Runes. But a bad impression of one of the best white creatures of all time is still a pretty good card. The 2 abilities make it very hard for your opponent to kill or block your creatures if you have mana available. White aggro decks were also really good in Kamigawa Standard, meaning that 8.5 Tails could often give meaningful protection for only 2 mana. Its points all came in white aggro decks, but it hasn't put up any top 8 since 2006. At number 5, it's Samurai of the Pale Curtain. For 2 white mana, it's a 2/2 with Bushido 1, which means that if it blocks or becomes blocked, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Basically, when you're attacking, it's sort of a form of evasion, because it becomes harder for creatures to block effectively, and it also means a Samurai is a pretty good blocker. On top of Bushido, the Samurai also makes it so that if a permanent would be put into a graveyard, it gets exiled instead. Keep in mind the effect is symmetrical, but symmetrical or not, it's a pretty nice hate ability to be stapled to what was a very efficient creature, especially back in 2004. The Samurai found multi-format success, appearing in Orzhov aggro decks in Block, White Weenie in Standard, and Selesnya aggro in Extended. It even saw some play in Legacy, where its ability to hate on the graveyard was the most potent, since graveyard-oriented decks are commonplace there. However, it hasn't put up any top 8 since 2011. At number 4, it's Light-Paws Emperor's Voice. For 1 generic and a white, it's a 2/2, and whenever an aura you control enters, if you cast it, you can tutor up an aura with mana value less than or equal to the aura that entered, provided it has a different name than each aura you control, and then you attach that card to Light-Paws. Basically, Light-Paws grabs you a free aura and gets enchanted with it every time you cast an aura. That means it gives you a full card worth of value anytime you can trigger it, and that can ultimately make Light-Paws into a pretty scary threat. Unsurprisingly, Light-Paws points have all come in aura decks and primarily in Pioneer, and Pioneer was played alongside Sram, a creature that also gives you a card anytime you cast an aura, so it should not come as a surprise that this deck was really loaded up with 1 mana auras, so that you could not only buff your creatures but get tons of value and rip through your deck. Eventually, you'd grab all that glitters, which was enough to make a creature in the deck into a must-kill threat. It's also seen some play in aura decks without Sram, which lean a little bit harder on protecting your enchanted creatures, either because they already have hexproof like Glade Cover Scout, or because you can protect them with something like Skrelv. These decks were more into running a bunch of singleton auras too, which not only made it easier to always have something to grab with Light-Paws, it also meant you could run some fairly situational auras, like Alpha Authority and Aqueous Form, which can make your creature unblockable. All that said, Light-Paws Emperor's Voice doesn't have any top 8 so far in 2025, and while it's powerful enough that we can't count it out entirely, it also doesn't feel like it's primed to put up a whole bunch of top 8s in the future, either. At number 3, it's Flourishing Fox. For 1 white mana, it's a 1/1, and whenever you cycle another card, you put a +1/+1 counter on the Fox, and you can also cycle it for 1 generic mana. Being able to run this out on turn 1, and then buff it by cycling cards away, which itself lets you rip through your deck, is pretty awesome, as is the fact that it comes with cycling itself. This means if you get it late, when it's less impressive, you can cycle it away to trigger your other cycling payoffs, which is often going to be more meaningful than playing a 1/1. Since this card's so all in on cycling, it's not hard to guess that all the points it has have come in cycling decks. These decks have had no shortage of cycling payoffs like Drannith's Stinger and Valiant Rescuer, which made it very easy for you to populate the board while picking away at your opponent. The ultimate goal of the deck was to cast a lethal Zenith Flare, which wasn't particularly hard because you had so many cards that cycled for only a single generic mana, so you could quickly load the graveyard with them and draw so many cards that you'd inevitably find Zenith Flare. All of that said, Flourishing Fox doesn't have any top 8 since 2022. Speaking of Flourishing Fox, I really want this YouTube channel to flourish. You can help me get a bunch of +1/+1 counters by subscribing to the channel. I'm hoping to hit 100,000 subscribers this year, and I'd really appreciate your help. At number 2, it's Werefox Bodyguard. For 1 generic and 2 white, it's a 2/2 with flash, and when it enters, you exile up to 1 other target non-fox creature until Werefox Bodyguard leaves the battlefield. You can also pay 1 generic and a white and sacrifice the fox to gain 2 life. So, this is basically an instant speed Banisher Priest, which is a pretty powerful thing. Being able to exile an opposing creature at instant speed and adding a body to the board is a great feeling. But the Bodyguard also comes with some pretty cool flexibility, because in addition to being a Banisher Priest, it's also kind of a Restoration Angel. While exiling an opposing creature is often the better choice, you can also use it to exile your own creature. And because the Bodyguard comes with a built-in sacrifice ability, you can get that creature back. This is something you can do if you're saving another creature that's being targeted by removal, or if you want to rebuy an Enters trigger, and these are things that come up reasonably often. In Standard, it's been played in Azorius aggro decks, and it's also heavily played in Pioneer, where it appears almost exclusively in Collected Company decks. Company is a super powerful instant because it lets you look at the top 6 cards of your library and put 2 creatures with mana value 3 or less from among them on the battlefield. If you build your deck correctly, and everyone who is playing Company did, you virtually always see several creatures when you cast it, giving you many choices. In the end, Company gives you a mana discount, gives your creatures flash, although that part doesn't matter much for the Werefox, and gives you some serious modality. While it's not quite as toolboxy as having a straight-up tutor, Company digs deep enough in your deck to give you some great choices. So yeah, the Bodyguard is having a great time in the format since it's such an impactful creature that Company can put into play. It's also seen some play in Legacy, Death, and Taxes, where sometimes a single copy of the Werefox is played. In this deck, you can tutor it up when you need it, typically with Recruiter of the Guard. Werefox Bodyguard is still seeing play in multiple formats and is legal in Standard right now too, and it's almost a foregone conclusion that it will one day be the number 1 card on the list. For now though, that card is the Restoration of Eiganjo, which only has a 1-point lead over the Bodyguard. It may not be immediately evident that this card is a fox, so bear with me. For 2 generic and a white, it's an enchantment saga, which means that it enters with a lore counter and gains another one after your draw step each turn. When a lore counter is added to a saga, you get the effect of the chapter that has the same number of the number of lore counters on the saga. In other words, typically the turn you play Restoration, you get Chapter 1, then Chapter 2 on your next turn, then Chapter 3 the turn after that. In this case, Chapter 1 grabs you a Plains and puts it into your hand. Chapter 2 lets you discard a card, and when you do, you can reanimate a permanent with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard, putting it into play tapped. And finally, Chapter 3 transforms a Restoration, and that's where the Fox comes in, because it turns into Architect of Restoration, a Fox Monk enchantment creature that is a 3/4 with Vigilance, and when it attacks or blocks, you get a 1/1 Spirit token. Yeah, you might have to wait for a little while, but Restoration gives you absurd value for only 3 mana. You get a Plains up front, and then Chapter 2 is a really flexible effect. You can, of course, bring back a creature or something, but one of the coolest things you can do with it is discard the land it searched up for you, because it can even put lands back into play from the graveyard, which means this is a white card with the potential to ramp your mana. And then after you get those 2 quality effects, you get a very formidable creature. Giving a creature with an attacks or blocks trigger Vigilance is pretty nasty, as it has the potential to spit out a 1/1 every single turn. Most of the Restoration's points have come in Standard, where it was very heavily played, appearing in virtually all white mid-range and control decks in the format. It has also appeared in Pioneer control decks and Modern Death and Taxes, but it doesn't have any top 8 since 2023, and that's why Werefox Bodyguard is going to be the number 1 Fox in the future. So those are the top 10 Foxes in Magic. If you're looking to build a Fox deck, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to catch up on past MTG top 10s, including many more that look at creature types, You should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.